Hello, welcome to another Search with Sean, and this is again one of our Chat with Sean series, where we chat to great experts who've got awesome insights in digital marketing and that kind of thing. So yeah, really looking forward to this one. As usual, we've got some quick updates, admin to get out of the way, then we get straight into the good stuff. So generally, as you've probably seen across my LinkedIn, if you follow me, we've got an event coming on in December. It's all around digital marketing. We've got a whole group of people that have got some great knowledge in different areas about digital marketing, covering all different types of topics. It's going to be really great, and it's going to be streamed across LinkedIn and YouTube. I haven't picked the dates exactly yet. I'm just waiting on a few things, but it should be confirmed in the next few days. Then I'll set up events and all that kind of thing. And if you like I say, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you will see that, or on YouTube. And obviously I'll promote it on these videos as well. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a good chunk of hours just fully focused on digital marketing, some insights you've never heard before from some great people. I've seen a couple of the videos already and they're awesome. So yeah, definitely make sure that you keep following for that. And obviously, if you subscribe to this channel, you'll be the first to know about that. Secondly, obviously, we do these chats quite regularly now. And last week I had a really fantastic guest, and that was Christian J. Ward, who's Executive Vice President and Chief Data Officer at Yext and co-author of the Amazon bestseller Data Leverage, Unlocking the Surprising Growth Potential of Data Partnerships. And we talked about the importance of data, how to use it, obviously how AI is getting involved and that kind of thing. It was just such a fascinating chat. And if you haven't seen it, you really should, because I think you'll learn a thing or two, because I definitely did. And yeah, we just, it was really, really interesting, and he's great at presenting his information. And then lastly, well, actually it's not lastly, but coming on to the last few points is that we've got, I've kind of done a new news episode where we just really quick fire news of everything going on in digital marketing, focused on obviously on SEO and AI. And we're going to do these every couple of weeks. And in this time, I covered 17 stories. And you can also check that out on Spotify as well. If you type in Search with Sean, that'll be on there. And it's like 28 minutes and just rapid fire news and kind of insights and case studies as we usually cover. And there'll be a new one soon. Well, next week, actually. And also, we've got another show coming up, a new format, doing a lot of these things, trying to expand, the kind of type of videos we do on this channel. And we've got like a panel based show, and without giving too much away, we've got some extremely interesting guests, and they're just going to be talking about kind of controversial things and things that are regularly talked about in the SEO community. And I think it's going to be a really, really interesting show, and that'll be coming on in January. So make sure, again, like and subscribe, and you'll be the first to hear about this show. And obviously follow me on LinkedIn for progress on that. And just generally, obviously, all those things, sharing, liking, whatever you want to do with these videos, it really does help, obviously, push up the kind of visibility of it on YouTube. And obviously, it all helps the algorithm. So anything you can do, comment, whatever you want to do, it just helps. Share it on LinkedIn. All of it helps. And finally, obviously, all these chats, like the news now, is on Spotify. So if you search Chat with Sean, you'll find these chats. All of them are on there. And also, if you type Search with Sean on Spotify, you'll find the news. So that's that. And now we'll finally get on to my great guest, and we'll do an introduction first. And I'm really, really excited about it. It's such an interesting topic, and I think something that maybe isn't discussed enough. And I know my guest has been really pushing it and doing a great job with it. Today we're joined by Giulia Panozzo. Again, I hope I've done that justice. An in-house director of customer acquisition and founder of Neuroscientiv, where she combines neuroscience, and marketing to create a data-driven strategies that truly engage. With degrees in neuroscience and physiobiology, Giulia brings a scientific edge to marketing, supported by a background in advanced brain research. She's a recognized speaker at the top industries like BrightonSEO and SMX, and has been sharing insights on podcasts and publications since 2022. And yeah, so great to have you on here, Giulia. I really, really excited about this chat.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the great introduction. I always like whenever some podcast host prepares an introduction, it's always super flattering. And so yeah, thank you for giving me the boost to this morning.
It sounds, what you've done is incredible. I'd love to do just half of that stuff. That sounds so fascinating. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into it. And obviously, I have seen you myself at BrightonSEO, so it's
I didn't know
really,
that.
Yeah, so it's really fascinating to speak to you now. Really cool. So yeah, I guess I've been starting this topic with a lot of, well, most of my guests, because there's so much going on. But what is your thoughts on the current state of search?
So it's multifaceted, I guess. I think it's a very interesting space to be in right now. And from a purely SEO perspective, I think it's been quite frustrating as well sometimes, because we cannot, forecast necessarily what the next steps are going to be. I know that we should be focused on our existing strategy, but obviously we're required to adapt with any new technology that comes on or any new update. From my perspective specifically, it's been a bit rough, I think, and I don't know if you relate. Maybe you do, but because as SEOs we keep on being evaluated, especially in big businesses, along the same things that we were last year. So, for example, even when we look at visibility and goals, we're always benchmarking to what we were seeing last year, and I don't think it's fair or representative because of all of the changes. So if we're looking at e-commerce, for example, I think from February onwards this year, we've seen a massive reduction in click-through rates and in traffic coming from specific products, because now there's a lot more of the organic product carousels that take on a lot of those clicks, and the user can compare already all the specs with their competitors as well directly on the SERP. Same goes for informational queries and AI overviews, although to a lesser extent. But I think for me specifically, it's been quite hard to communicate this to, stakeholders, because it sounds like excuses to why we might not be delivering the same results or better results than last year. But I think it's an opportunity for us not only to educate our stakeholders, but to really dig into the deeper layers of what search engines are trying to do, which are reaching the user. So for us, it's an opportunity to start looking more at those behavioral data and more about decision making in the user. We have an opportunity to tap into all of these new areas, but also into new specializations, because we started as SEOs, and I don't know when you started. I started in 2017, and I think it was already changing, but a bit still, best practices were, the same for everyone. There was pretty much the same things that we were all trying to achieve. And now there are so many new avenues that we can pursue, so many new channels. And yeah, there's so many new things that we can tap into that I think it's making search a lot more, how do you say, versatile and a lot more interesting. What's your take on that, Sean?
No, 100%. You've got put up some great points there. I think you're right in terms of internally it can be frustrating, because obviously there's not enough hours in the day to keep on talking to people about SEO, and obviously you're trying to. A lot of them are kind of still, they're still getting their mind around the idea that traffic isn't the main way of measuring things now. You're looking at visibility and reach and stuff, and they're still getting their heads wrapped around that. And now things like Search GPT and AI overviews and that have come into play, and now you're trying to educate them around that. And obviously we had all the kind of knowledge we found around Google Chrome and some of the leak stuff and that kind of thing, how Google are using certain pieces of data. So it's really difficult. You don't get to talk to them enough to kind of keep on updating on that. So yeah, it's very interesting. I think obviously it is a kind of uphill battle sometimes for us SEOs, but hopefully if your company are open-minded enough, they'll understand what you're trying to do. And hopefully if you are concentrating on the right things, you're still seeing the results, positive results. But obviously I know some industries, my industry is a bit different, obviously a charity sector, and we are one of the bigger players in that market. So, you know, we kind of helped in that sense. But I know if you work in e-commerce, the SERP has changed completely. So, and some may say, and I've got friends in PPC, but some may say it's favored paid in many aspects. But I guess they've given some back to organic with some free listings and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Yeah, it's been
cool. Well, yeah, and like I say, we've got so much more to cover. So let's get cracking on some other topics. So, how has your background in neuroscience influenced the way that you approach customer acquisition and marketing?
So for me, I think it was a very natural transition into understanding more about the user, because I didn't have a formal education into search engines or anything computer related. So yeah, when I started in SEO, it was by chance, like many of us do, I think. So I think for me, it was very clear that, you know, the bigger aim was to reach the user, which wasn't necessarily, you know, shared in the industry, because we've always tended to hyper focus on the official ranking factors. But I think what helped me as well, developing that sort of interest towards the user, is that when I started, there was the Fred update. I don't know if you remember 2017. And I remember that specifically one of my interviews was centered around that and around the user experience. That seemed to be a bigger focus, along with all of the things that we had seen before in previous algorithms. So yeah, for me, it was a very natural transition into learning about SEO, but never leaving the user aside, and always trying to understand a bit better how to cater to the user from the very early stages of the journey, which are search. I think now we're in a better space for that as well, because of all the evidence that you see, that you mentioned as well. And it's true that we're not sitting in, you know, those courtrooms. We don't have access to the full documents, but I think there's enough already information to assume that, you know, the user and user signals are actually used to determine rankings and like post rankings specifically. I won't be able to explain it as, you know, as nicely and as expertly as Mark Williams-Cook, but he had an awesome presentation on that. And I think, like, I encourage everyone to go and look for that. So yeah, I think when I started, and then like moving on with my career, I started noticing parallels as well in the way that the SERP was sort of reinforcing some of the patterns that we know that humans use in decision making. So essentially the SERP is biased, and I think it's no news to anyone right now, especially now. I think as users, we're so used to get everything straight away. We just type a search and then we look at the first result. If it's satisfactory, we just stop there, which is, you know, something that's, I guess it's functional in a way, because we're always in a rush. We're always looking for information that's available straight away. But I think it has changed the way also that we get information. And that's been a really interesting pattern for me to explore, the link between our own biases and then how the SERP reinforces those biases. And and understanding more about how human decision making works in order to improve search. And sometimes there's not, enough data around that, because we know that whatever data we have in the lab, for example, might not transfer to yourself on the tube looking for something real quick. You're more prone to look at what's the first satisfactory results that that satisfies your query. And I think there's been a lot of, as well, when we look at consumer psychology and neuroscience in the space of the SERP, there's been a lot of, I guess, misinformation around what kind of biases we can leverage, and the thought that we can essentially get users to do whatever just by tapping into their biases. And it's not necessarily true. So that's kind of how my approach from neuroscience has shaped my way into search. I think I do apply some of my insights and some of the research that I've done and I keep on doing to search, but I always take into account the context, which is, really important. You cannot claim that everything you find in a certain context applies necessarily to another context. So I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, no, great. And what's your take on these OpenAI, Google, etc., signing partnership deals with certain publications to get more exposure on those search platforms, and your take from that kind of your angle in terms of Reddit being more visible on search results, well, quite visible on search results. You got any takes on that?
So I think in general, it really depends on what audience we're talking about, because if we were talking about somebody that doesn't work in digital marketing and is not really aware of these deals, I think it's it's not providing a great environment to search. But I think we are, like, as users, we are more discerning, and when we start to notice the pattern that Reddit provides skewed opinions, or that consistently I try to search for something and the result is not relevant, or the result might be misinformed, then I try to stay away from those results. I think we're very quick to judge something based on our experience with it. However, I do think that it makes it harder for us when we don't really have the time or the drive to be critical, because all of these results and all of our judgments towards a result, if it doesn't comply with what we're looking for, I think it's much more likely to be evaluated critically if we have the time to do so. So we're not in a rush to do something or to find something. And on the other hand, we have the right motivation. If I'm looking for a restaurant to have a nice dinner with my in-laws, then I'm more likely to, just like consider more options and like critically evaluating the reviews, for example. If there's Reddit, then great. But if it's just, like, I want fish and chips around me because I'm really hungry one day, then I'm less likely to critically evaluate, my options. So it does have this dichotomy of, providing, I guess, quicker results, and maybe providing even more information, but it has the challenge that we need to start being more critical towards what we're seeing, which might not be something that's accessible to all of us, because not all of us are actually aware that that's what's happening, beside search as we know it. Have you noticed anything in, like, the people you talk to, or like even people in your circle, how that has skewed their search?
Well, I don't know on that, but I think generally, and obviously I can't speak for everyone, and this is just an observation, I don't know if it's fact or anything, but I do feel like people with like legacy media, mass media, I think people are getting onto the sense that they have biases, and many of them have their own point of view, and they try and skew news stories based on that. I think that's becoming quite a known thing. And so then they go to other resources like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram for their kind of updates on what's going on and that kind of thing. And I think if they knew that potentially that these platforms are also being kind of manipulated in the same way, it'd be an interest, because I think they're getting onto like ones that have been around for a long time, like TV and radio, but now there's kind of these new channels. And obviously, you know, I did cover it in the news and in YouTube, and we know in past years, Facebook and X have done stuff to not show certain things, and that for me is like a no-go. I think that's really like, I don't care what you think, really. It's not your decision to think, unless it's something really bad, like illegal or really offensive. You don't have the right to take these things down. And I think that's, if people started knowing more about that, basically what people want is they want to know the news, or they want to know what's the best website. They don't care what your thoughts are, really. Obviously there's certain checks and balances that got to be done, but ideally people just want a search result that shows them the best outcome for their search, obviously. But there's seems to be biases for certain brands and certain sites over other, and obviously it's come out around Forbes and other sort of affiliate sites recently. But like you say, the normal sort of person not working in digital marketing probably had no idea about all this. So that's the thing, you know. But no, it's really, really interesting. And obviously when I picked up on those stories, like I say, I'm not in America for one, so it doesn't bother me, but obviously I don't lean one way or the other, but I just find that stuff in the past, what's happened and recently, that I think that's something that social sites and any platform that has that control shouldn't be doing, you know. And so I'm gonna ramble on. It's
It's like that article that came out, I think a year ago now, the Verge article, that how SEOs have ruined the internet. And I think as SEOs, actually, we do have the duty to report on that and to spread the news about what's going on for search, because we are so focused sometimes on, you know, just getting, I mean, obviously it depends on the industry, but on getting the right traffic at any costs, that we sometimes fail to report on these very important things that are happening in the background. And we tend to try to comply with everything that's going on, any partnerships, any changes that might not even be the best ones for the user. I do share the concern, and I think there have been people who have spoken about this as well. And as SEOs and digital marketers, I think we do have the duty to educate the people around us. And I try to do it with my parents, which I don't know. It's been really hard because, you know, the older generation is not they have not been born with technology. And for them, it's already quite, looking at Facebook, for example, provides already a different opinion from what they're seeing on TV. And it's been really hard to explain to them that, you know, you might not get the right information. Information is manipulated there. And so is on other channels too. I think the newer generation that's coming up is much more discerning. Even on Reddit or even on TikTok, for example, now they just skip ads because no one wants a recommendation that is paid for. Everyone wants to hear authentic voices. And I think I don't have the answer to that. I don't know how we would do it, but like, it's high time that we try to, just get those authentic voices heard rather than everything else, all of the noise. It's been really hard to discern in the noise because of all of these things that are happening in the search, but also on other channels, because everyone's trying to get the same thing, which is traffic. Everyone wants to get people on their side. But yeah, it's a really interesting time for us to be in search.
Yeah, and you're right around like the personalization thing. Obviously, it's helpful, the fact that, because you're going to see things that you're interested in, but also it's just giving you one angle of what's actually going on in the world. And that point of like, there's, you know, you're only ever going to hear that kind of point of view that leans towards what you're thinking anyway. So it's a slippery slope in some ways. So next point was like, can you share an example of marketing strategy where your neuroscience expertise have made a measurable impact on engagement or conversions?
Yeah, so a few of them that I did early on were quite simple. They had to do more with reading patterns as we know them and with cognitive load. So we know, for example, that in English-speaking readers, the visual span is asymmetric. So we tend to focus on the left side of the sentence, or like we have a fixation point that's more like towards the left, which is the reason why a lot of people put the keyword first, for example, and then everything that comes to the right, we tend to get more information from, but it also largely depends on the context. So we can sort of guess what comes next. So a lot of experiments I've done are around that. Cognitive load is also something that's quite simple to grasp, and there's a lot of evidence around that. And that's something that I've also tried to do, not so well in my own website, to be honest, but like when it comes to ecom, it's been quite good, because essentially we need to figure out how users like what kind of information users are looking for, and making sure that it's prominent and it doesn't get muddied in a lot of noise. Because, I mean, cognitive resources in general in everyday life are quite scarce. If we look at all of the stimuli that we have around us at every time, we are surrounded by noises, by visuals, everything, especially now that we have screens on every sort of, you know, I've got just 3 screens on my desk right now, right? And there are stimuli coming from all of them. So understanding the cognitive resources that users have in a certain task as well, and knowing where they are within the journey, help us establish what their cognitive load looks like. So if you're early on in the journey as well, there's a lot of companies that tend to put, for example, a lot of information that doesn't really resonate with the user, and it's not quite clear what the main brand message or the main brand service is. And that has also been something that I've experimented on my own, my consultancy website. And people just don't even get to appreciate that because there's just so much noise that all of your information gets lost. So that for my own website, for example, I've been using Clarity, Microsoft Clarity, which is open, like it's free. It's quite easy to use to track scrolls. And I could see very easily that if it's a blog post, then people, because like, especially if they're coming through the website and then onto the blog post, then they try to read, like their cognitive load is a bit, I guess it's a bit different from what they come in from if they're just looking to know who I am, for example. So when they come onto the main page, what I noticed is that a lot of the people were just not scrolling to my services. Like they were not visible, although they're like, you know, just below the middle of the page. That was enough. Like they had already consumed so much information before, which was like a CTA, a brand message, and who I am, that they didn't really care about like scrolling down. So these were some of the earlier ones. Other ones that have worked particularly well for clients in the e-com space had to do with isolating biases from the way people search, which it's very accessible. Everyone can do that, especially now with, you know, Gemini and everything. We can actually do this at scale. So I think it's quite helpful. So for example, some of the branded queries that sometimes they're obvious to the brands, but we don't get much click-through rates for. You know, if it's a branded query, you should get quite a lot of click-through rates. And that wasn't the case for a number of queries for my clients. And those have to do with essentially blockers. So returns, delivery information, stuff that might have been somewhere on the website, but it wasn't quite clear because, you know, if it's not visible, if it's not immediately, immediately visible, then people look for it. So just having a look at how those, well, the queries themselves, how they were formulated, allowed me to have a look at what were the underlying biases that we could solve for, not only for that specific query, but across a number of other queries and across a number of other domains. So, for example, if it's around returns, I know that the need that the user is displaying is this bias towards loss aversion. They don't want to, you know, if they have two options to buy from, they tend to go for the one that has returns options available, because even if they might not return it, they want to have that chance not to lose their money on it. So they're more prone to make a decision towards something that protects them in case they change their mind. And if we start to isolate those biases that we're solving from, then we can try to find other opportunities within the website. So for SEO, for example, when it comes to returns, obviously you can make it more prominent on the website if you have a FAQ page, which is something we did back when FAQ schema was a thing and was still displayed on the SERP. That was very short-lived because then like it became less and less prominent, but the results were great at the beginning. But it also has to do then with, okay, how are we communicating this from the very early stages, even before they land on our website, because they're clearly looking for that. But we also want to cater to people that might be looking for that, but they're not necessarily aware of our brands. So we started doing return schema and also talking to the paid team to put the return policy on the merchant center. So yeah, and all of that has also got to do with other messaging on the website. For example, if you know you're in e-com, you got a return query that keeps on coming up, or you have, for example, or you're a tool and you have free trials, you're always trying to cater to the same need, which is people need to trust you and feel protected. So make it more like, try to gather all of the evidence that you have to show your customers and make them more prominent, not only in content, but like across all of the features that we know we have available now to make it more accessible from early on in the journey when they're on the search engine. And finally, there was another one for a client of mine where this will sound really stupid, to be honest, or like really basic, but the website was, I think it was an international website, and I think it was, the Italian website. But then they had a pop-up for an offer that displayed the currency in dollars. And that was, preventing people from like, they would abandon actually. So that actually just changing the currency towards the familiarity of the currency that people were used to in Italy massively changed the dropout rate. But yeah, there's a lot that we can do with just like these tiny little things that might not even leverage, advanced neuroscience or advanced techniques to look into deeper signals that we can do just right now in the SEO space.
Yeah, great. And it's those little things that can make such a big difference. I think that I've seen that in my own kind of career where you do small changes but can have such a big impact. And how do you think LLMs are going to change the game in that sense? Because obviously you say about the content side of it, they're going to just totally skip all that stuff and just get straight to the answers or the facts on your website. So how do you think that's going to change it?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think that's something that I got to explore myself, because I know that now there's all of this optimized for LLMs sort of wave, which I think is going to be quite crucial when it comes, for example, to brand, to all of the branded informations that if we're not providing right, then the LLM gets wrong. So, for example, I think it will provide a challenge to us to keep our, all of our information up to date and make sure that that displays also in an LLM. And I do think that it massively plays in differently in different stages of the journey. Especially if it's, for example, a new brand, and if you're looking to compare one brand to another, and you ask ChatGPT, which one do you think I should go for? It's quite hard to figure out what the behavior will result in, because if it's two novel brands, then probably I'm going to trust ChatGPT with whatever, or any kind of other LLM. If it's a brand that I have already invested in and I'm already familiar with, then I might just be looking to see how the new one that maybe has a better offer compares, but I have my element of attachment to the older brand. So I think it definitely will change behavior. I don't know how, and that's something that will become really, really interesting to explore. Not only from a user perspective on how it will change their behavior, but also on how we make sure that we keep our information up to date and that LLM is actually feeding in from the right one. Because if I put up the return policy today, maybe something that was not available, and then the LLMs get updated I think there's still quite a lot of delay in the way that they get information, then my customers might not know about this until later down the line. So yeah, it's a tricky territory. I don't have the answers for that, but I think it's definitely something that a lot of people, like reputable people like Aleda Solis, is looking at and is sharing information on how to be more visible for LLMs. But it is a massive challenge. I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah, I think it kind of still underlines the importance of all the kind of old SEO techniques that you should be doing anyway. So keeping your data up to date across all the major platforms that you're on, your website up to date, make sure it's structured, as we talked about last week with Christian, about structured data, keeping it up to date, keep feeding the machine what it needs, because like you say, on AI overviews or LLM like ChatGPT, if they ask some information, they may not necessarily take it from your website. They may take it from a large website like Wikipedia or Forbes or wherever you're mentioned, and then the customer might take that for being the facts, and so you can't. The more you kind of help the machine understand about and keep it up to date, the more chance you got. And like I say, when they're doing comparison pieces, obviously that's why you need to be on like third-party review websites like Trustpilot or whatever, on Google My Business, on Wikipedia if you can, these kind of resources, because that's going to be the way that the machines are learning. So there's kind of the same techniques, but just make sure you're on top of it, I guess. So could you walk us through, just change the topics, could you walk us through the process of scraping and analyzing customer reviews to extract actionable insights, kind of touching on what just said, but
yeah. So actually I wrote an article about this, and I've got my notes here because I got all of the all of the specs, but basically I was looking, like I started dabbling into this because I was talking at SMX about the behavioral data that SEOs have been ignoring because they're not official ranking signals. And, essentially when we started, and like how our profession has been known to operate, has always been about search engine. And so one of these ones that I touched on was customer logs, for example, and just the conversations that your users are having with either the chatbot or your customer agents. And I didn't really have that information available. So I was like, where can I get some user data that is, easily accessible without having to go into the chat log? So I went to Trustpilot, which is the next sort of like, it's accessible to everyone. even if you don't have access from your own brand or your own client, then you can just like go onto your Trustpilot. And this process actually is something that can be done with, for example, online forums as well. So we know that Trustpilot normally gets a bit more of the post-purchase funnel. So a lot of the blockers that might come up, or like a lot of the opinions might be skewed by the way that, you know, the transaction has gone. But yeah, it can be done with a number of other outlets where you have user-generated content. So the way that I did it was I went onto Trustpilot, and then I opened Colab. So Colab is basically a free and open source tool by Google that allows you to write code in Python and execute it within the browser. So you don't need to download anything. You can do everything in browser, and it's super accessible. That if you need actually, you know, a guide for that, I can recommend Brittany Müller. I hope I'm pronouncing her name okay, but she did a workshop, like an introductory workshops on Colab and machine learning, and it was fantastic. And Lazzarino Stoi as well talks about machine learning. So I think Colab is a great way to start, you know, start doing things at scale. So yeah, open Colab, and then I found a way to scrape all of the reviews from Trustpilot. Obviously, I didn't come out with a script because I'm no coder, but we have an amazing resource now called Gemini. So Gemini is integrated already within Colab, so you can just ask it to write a script for you to get to scrape the reviews. And it did. There were a few trials and errors because as I was trying to do so, I did get into some blockers. But in general, what you need is a number of libraries. You need to import the framework first, which is WebDriver, that allows you to perform automated tasks across the browsers. Then Beautiful Soup is the HTML parser, which is the important element about this one. And then there's Pandas, which is to analyze and manipulate data. And on my website, I've got like exactly the code to do that. So the first step is just to install the framework and the libraries. And then you can move on to your scraping task, which is the first one. So the scraping task to me initially was, I mean, it was quite easy. Again, came out with a script on Gemini. What I noticed is that unless you define it, it just comes up with the first page. So obviously you just get a selected number. So I had to edit it to get exactly like the reviews at scale. And it came out with a number of, I think it was around 1,000 of reviews, which is all user generated. It's stuff that otherwise will take you a long time to get. And then, yeah, once I had these, basically this big document, so there's two ways to go about this. Actually, there's probably more ways, but those are the two ways that I went about it. The first one was to go onto Voyant Tools. I hope I'm pronouncing this right because I don't know if it's Voyant or Voyant. But it's a free tool to analyze n-grams. And I know that there is a lot of information about analyzing n-grams. So you essentially look at what are the most, the most frequent words, in what context they're used. And then there is another talk that I loved at BrightonSEO that touches on lemmatization, which is another task that can be really good for this sort of finding the actionable insights afterwards. I'm going to send the link to you, so maybe you can put it in the show notes. But the talk was by my friend Fulashade, and I've got to get the link to you because it was fantastic. So essentially, once you have the reviews, you just like find a way to analyze what the most common words are, what the context that they're used in is, if it's negative, positive, and then you focus on what might be the blocker so that you can get actionable insights. And the other easy way to do this without having to rely on maybe like intermediate tools is to get everything out, everything that's like branded. So if I had a look at eBay, for example. I took away eBay, all mentions of eBay. And that was because, especially if you're working for a website, you don't want to feed information, sensitive information. I mean, that's information that's essentially available already online, but you don't want to feed it to ChatGPT. But I asked ChatGPT, once I took away all the mentions brand, okay, can you come out with some actionable insights about this? Like, what are the blockers? What are the main blockers that you see, and how can we solve it? It didn't really give me SEO things. It just gave me like, oh, you need to make customer service better, or you need to do this and that, and it was quite general. So it's not perfect. I think it gives you a better idea of like what the main topics are. But another way to do that is to sorry, I'm just like rambling, and I know that my process here has been quite this is representative of how I approached the task itself, because I couldn't do it initially. It was just a way for me to solve a problem, and then I kept on going back to these steps and like trying to refine them. But I also try to do the second task of analyzing and finding actionable insights on Colab itself. Again, I asked Gemini to come up with a way to categorize in 10 different categories, if I'm not wrong, all of these actionables. And I think you need a general sense of what the blockers or like what the main topics are, which I think is where you need to have at least the main topics figured out via another tool. But yeah, essentially this other script categorizes not only the main topic, but also gives you back an actionable insight, which again, you will have to rework in terms of how it works, or like how it applies to SEO specifically. Because for example, for me, the things that came out were streamline return process and make it more customer friendly, encourage better communication between buyers and sellers, because we were talking about eBay, and then enhance customer support channels. And this is not something that as an SEO I can do like myself, because some of these will be brand choices and like just, yeah, it depends on the product itself. But what I can do is like having a look at all of the things that as an SEO I can do. So making sure, for example, that the return schema is enabled and the return policy is marked in the merchant center. Maybe having FAQs covering returns. When it comes to making to encourage better communication between buyers and sellers, maybe enable Q&As on the product page itself, like enable some UGC. That's something that as an SEO I could do, so that it facilitates the communication. And then when it comes to enhance customer support channels, for example, that was another one that I was given as an actionable. Then maybe make support channels more visible on the page. Like if you have a chatbot that's only available on the very first page and not on any other page, like on, for example, on the product page, then make it there as well, or make a link, put a link to the customer support page or to the FAQs. So yeah, it's not a perfect process yet, but that's something that I started doing. And that's, I think, a good thing about LLMs, because I wouldn't have known how to even approach this task at scale if I didn't know about Colab, and that I could actually that I could have started solving problems with Gemini. And I think there's obviously like a number of trials and errors and a lot of critical thinking that you need to still apply. You can't do it like as an automatic task. But yeah, it's something that I'm really excited as well to start delving into, because you can do it for your brand, but you can also do it for your competitors, and you can compare what's not only the blockers, but you can also compare what you're doing better than your competitor according to your own customers, and then figure out then, okay, these are my value propositions that I'm going to make more prominent on the pages, so that people make it like it's easier for people when they're comparing options to know what my pluses are as compared to my competitor. But yeah, it was a very winded answer to go into that process.
No, it's fascinating, and obviously that's a really good point. Actually, if you can see a clear weakness in your competitor, you can make that even more obvious on your site, and then it enhances it even further. So That's a really good point. And obviously, like you say, LLMs are giving us and this is what they were meant to do, is to give us ammo to, work out these complex tasks quicker than we could before, or even if we couldn't do it at all before, and now we can. And obviously they're all getting very good at analyzing and creating code. Like Claude have just come out with a new kind of model to do that now, and like I say, Gemini, ChatGPT, they're all getting better at that, so that's great. And yeah, all the links as you mentioned, and I'll make sure I grab those from you, but I'll have a search myself, but they'll all be in the description as usual. All your kind of presentations on this stuff will also be in the description. So, for you, for viewers, want to check it out, then obviously go in the description as usual. All the key links will be there. And on the Ngram stuff, yeah, Chris Long, who I mentioned quite a lot on this channel, he's done really good stuff on that around Screaming Frog, how to extract the Ngram information on that. So, but yeah, your stuff is on my to-do list anyway. So yeah, I'm sure many others will be really interested in that. So just on to the last few points, I guess. So how does negativity bias impact the way consumers interpret and react to marketing messages? And how can marketers design strategies to counteract this?
Yeah, actually, you just mentioned something that made me think about this, because you mentioned, when we are looking at our competitors and their weaknesses, we can make them more prominent, or like we can make ourselves better as compared to them. And I'm like, yeah, actually, no. As in, like, there's going to be people that are going to do that, but I think it's icky. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one to do that, because when, it comes into the negativity bias portion here. When somebody is a bad actor, or somebody like places, like does something that doesn't align with our moral compass, then we tend to remember that. And I know from a fact, because somebody, they were selling a tool to me essentially, and they unprompted came up with the reasons why, like some of the weaknesses of their competitors as compared to them. And that didn't sit right with me. But again, yeah, that's just like a segue into this new portion of the negativity bias. I think negativity bias is something that as humans, we have sort of ingrained from very early on. It's this over attention to the negative. I've been talking about it for a while now. And I think the study that I always mention that's great, and to illustrate the point, is that one called Negativity Drives Online News Consumption by Claire Robertson. She did this study with headlines, and I think it was 105,000 headlines. And some of them had more prominent negative, were more prominent in a negative sense, as in like they had more negative words. And other ones had, I think there were neutral ones, and then other ones that were more positive. And although the positive words were more prevalent in the data set, what her team noticed was that the negative words in news headlines increased consumption rates. So whatever was more negative got more click-through rates, which is something I think we're aware of. It's no news. But especially when it comes to political and economic news, it showed more polarization. And I think that's something that digital marketers have tried to exploit, especially in the news space. I don't think so much in other sort of industries. I've seen it being more prominent in the news space, but when they use words like tragedy, or when they make a headline more controversial just to get that click. And I think, again, the SERP is reinforcing those, because they see the click, then they're like, okay, well, this works, right? So we're just going to serve that. And it's a loop that feeds itself, and it's not quite constructive. But I think we need to give the credit to the user as well. We are discerning of that. We know that that's happening, especially if we consume digital content every day. We know that most of the times that's a trick. And that's when it becomes a bit of a double-edged sword, because then, marketers think that they can trick us into clicking by using, like, overexposing us to something negative. But then when we as users realize that it's not serving our purpose, or like it's not serving our aim, then we tend to stay away from that result. We tend to say, okay, well, they were bad to me. This result was bad to me once, then I just take it as a generalization that the source is not trustworthy, because they're not going they're going to do it again. I think the negative sticks to our mind much more prominently than any positive sort of stimulus, which has to do with, there's biological like reasons why that is. We seem to have this asymmetry as well in the way that we process negative stimuli. And there's a number of evidence around that. And it seems to have to do with an evolutionary adaptive reason why we developed that as humans, because if something is perceived as a threat, then we need to be more reactive because it's survival of the species. However, obviously in the space of digital marketing, we're not necessarily exposed to these kind of like life or death threats. But again, when it comes to, okay, I'm putting so much energy into evaluating an option and then something is not going right in one transaction, I'm just going to take it as a as a signal that this site is not trustworthy. So that's how we can actually use this knowledge about the negativity bias to drive our to drive constructively our customer acquisition and retention, because we know that negativity is what skews decision towards a certain outcome. And there was this Baymard study that they do every year on cart abandonment, and it shows how much, like, even when they they look at these cart abandonment rates and why that is happening, they try to isolate the reasons. And this is after after they take away the just browsing sort of people, and looking at why users do abandon the cart when they've already they found the offer compelling, they want to invest, but then there's something blocking that transaction and they don't even come back to it. It always has to do with mistrust in the website, because maybe information is not clear about the payment, or because the payment option is not available in their country. A too complicated process, like a 9-step process and I think airlines are doing this a lot. Sometimes our need justifies the reason why we go through all of those steps, but sometimes it's not. If I'm choosing between two relatively brand new options, that would be something that definitely takes me away from the longest journey. Some of the other reasons are they abandoned the cart because information wasn't transparent about shipping, for example. The fees were not included, the VAT was not included or was not clarified before the checkout. And then the other one is because website had errors. So the website crashed, which is not something that it's intentional. It's not a dark pattern or anything. It might be something that, just the website is in overload or something. And that's the way that as marketers, we can leverage negativity bias not by tricking users into coming to us when we provide false information, when we provide an inflated version of the truth, but just by knowing that whatever misstep we do in the entire journey is going to affect the way they see us, not only now, but in the future as well. If they have a bad experience with us on our website, from either the search not showing a good result, or down the funnel to the checkout stage, they're not going to come back to us. They're going to remember us for the negative portion of their journey, although there might have been so many things that they found compelling about us. So yeah, I think that's the way that we can leverage negativity bias, just by knowing that that's something that can massively impact the way that users make decisions, and collaborating as well with other teams within our business or in our client's business to make sure that the entire journey is taken care of, that the hard work that we put in SEO is not lost because of UX errors, for example.
Yeah, no, 100%. Great points. And are you good to hang on for the last few points?
Yeah, absolutely.
Pretty sweet. No, it's great insight. So that's really good. And did we trying to catch up where we are? So next
Yeah.
one. So yeah, I think we covered negative bias in terms of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so how do you see the future of marketing evolving, particularly with the integration of more science-backed strategies? Yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, I think when you talk about sort of those kind of inflated headlines, I think more and more, like you say, especially the younger generations are clocking onto that kind of, what's going on there. So I think that could change things quite a lot. But yeah, I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. So I think it's providing like more diversity, because now we know it's not only about search engines, and we know it's not only about Google. We know that there's so many other channels that we can look into. So I hope it's in a good direction. I think a lot of more people now are dabbling into consumer psychology and looking more at the entire journey, which is great. My only hope, and I think, now that we have LLMs and everything, it can be quite challenging, is that we spend as an industry time to educate ourselves on reliable sources before we evangelize others, because it's a fine line, especially with the amount of misinformation that we can get through the SERP. As you mentioned, now we have everything at our fingertips. It's really easy to stop our journey towards getting more information to whatever LLMs are feeding us. And I saw yesterday, I don't remember who the post was from. I think it might have been Mark Rofe, who's a professional in the digital PR space. And he was showing how essentially there was a number of fake authors or like fake experts cited in very reputable sources. So we need to be really discerning of that. But another post that I've seen, and I think might come really, really handy for everyone looking to educate themselves before, spreading information. I saw this post by Sara Borghi. She's a fellow SEO. You can find her on LinkedIn. She built this script to get all of the research around a certain topic on Google Scholar. And Google Scholar is for researchers, or like gathers research that's peer reviewed, and that's normally real research. I hope that's not going to change in the future, but that's also something that we can do to better inform ourselves. And then I hope that, and I think it's a need, that we need to use more critical thinking. We know that there's so much information we can gather now. There's so many areas that we can specialize in, and we just need to be critical of everything that we see. And also, now that there's like more science into the industry, I think it's a great space to start experimenting, because it's a brand new field, like it's a brand new arena for all of us. All of these changes in visibility, all of these changes in the way that information is served, and all of the other channels. We have everything to learn. And it's great to see not only one voice speaking, but diverse voices speaking, and everything that we're finding out. And we're never going to achieve, hopefully, the very universal truth about search engines, but I think different perspectives can amount to a great deal of knowledge that we can use not only to serve the engine but the user, because I think even when we look at AI and what it can do now, sure, it can do a lot of things, but it's not replacing humans. I know that this is not a controversial take. Everyone's talking about that. But I saw it, for example, in some of the, even in the predictive AI from Clarity, Microsoft Clarity, great tool. And they also offer you the chance to have these insights, not only about the current journey, but also about what your users might might click into based on previous research. And that goes for a number of other insights. But it's not infallible because, for example, again, I got to link to this post because it's amazing. There was this person using the predictive AI tool from Microsoft Clarity to predict where the user might have clicked on his brand new website. And it was always the CTA or the menu, but the menu and the CTA said, get infected now by viruses. And obviously, like, the predictive AI was taking into account previous insights from where people click normally, but wasn't taking into the account the context or, the messaging. So I think there's a lot to experiment, and there's a lot that, as humans with certain expertise in this area, we can contribute to even these new changes in the industry, just like by being ourselves and applying critical thinking to everything we do.
Yeah, no, 100%. And obviously, it's really important, like you said earlier, to keep in communication with other departments in your business to get insights from them, customer service and so on and so forth. And also, like I was talking with Christian last week, we have got all this data to our, more data than we've ever had as SEOs, and which is great. But obviously, it's about what data how important it is, how trustworthy it is, and making sure that you're using the right data, because obviously you put junk in, you get junk out. You need to make sure that you're doing a scientific data-led approach. You need to trust that data and understand why it's important and how it's going to add to what you're trying to get out from it. So yeah, obviously I've always been interested in working with data and that scientific approach, and obviously working closely with UX and that kind of thing. And like you said, using tools like Clarity, but Hotjar, whatever it is. So yeah, it's fascinating how we can put that together. And obviously it's more important than ever now to know about what the user. So yeah, fantastic. And in terms of what advice would you give to marketers interested in incorporating neuroscience principles into their own strategies?
Yeah, so I would say start by looking at cognitive biases, because there's a lot of information out there and everyone has talked about cognitive biases, I feel like, by now. So just try to get acquainted with how, human decision making works normally, then start thinking about how it applies to your specific industry and your specific website. Because I think a misconception about this is that everything we see in one insight is going to be the holy grail for every journey on the planet. But that's not true, because otherwise we would always be doing the same thing, right? So I think that's a great, there's a number of books and resources about cognitive biases. And also try to get educated by people who work in the space as well. Joe Devlin is a professor at the University College London, UCL, and he always posts on LinkedIn really great stuff. It's very accessible. He's a professor of cognitive neuroscience, so he talks about cognitive neuroscience and also sometimes how it applies to marketing and decision making, because he's got a consultancy that does exactly that, that bridges the academic research with the industry. And he's a great resource to start learning from, because he also tries to educate about the neuromyths. I think it's something that's very easy to fall into. We see neuroscience and we say, okay, well, now I'm going to learn how to read minds. I'm going to learn how to force users to do everything I want. And that's not really it. I think that's a common misconception. And a way to start as well, it's looking at behavioral data. And there's some data that we can get very easily. We talked about, just looking at how people formulate queries on your website. Is it like internal searches? Is it data from Google Search Console? And then try to gather those insights and match them with other data that you can get. For example, we saw I did a study on internal searches and the brand new navigation, and we could see a really good insight from the number of searches for certain brands that had been taken away from the navigation, weren't as prominent because they were moved to another level. So that was already telling us something that the user might not tell us specifically. It's not telling us, please put the brand back on, but they're looking on the internal search. Same goes for the way that they formulate searches. So look at all of these implicit, I would say, data that users might already be looking to give us. So Google Search Console normally look at branded queries, what has the least CTR. There is data from Web Analytics, whether you're using GA4 or whether you're using like a proprietary tool. Look at the internal searches, look at engagement metrics, look at the journey on page. I know that as SEOs, we're not, or like traditionally, it's not something that we normally look into. But I think now that is more about the entire journey, that's something that we need to take into account. And then if you want to get more data, so heat maps are quite, again, we talked about Microsoft Clarity or Hotjar. Heat maps are quite accessible and everyone can have a look at that. You can also run eye tracking studies. They're normally less scalable, obviously, because it's always a control condition where the user needs to give you consent to be recorded while they're reading something or looking at something. But already relying on eye tracking studies on a certain website, for example, to sort of inform some of the data that might be lost during the evaluation of the website, or some of the placement of some products or of some messaging, can be super influential to the way that we place that information. But I would rely on specific companies that can do that for you. And if you want to learn about that, obviously there's resources as well. But yeah, I think in general, there is so much that we can do to get informed. I would want to warn not to take like a LinkedIn course, because I've seen that, and I think that's something that I need to warn against. We talked about misconceptions, right, about neuroscience and marketing, and I think it gets a bit of a bad reputation because there's a lot of people who might take a LinkedIn course on neuromarketing, and then they're like, okay, I'm a neuromarketer now, and now, I can teach you how to read minds. And that's something that, as a neuroscientist who works in marketing, is extremely frustrating, because it makes us, it makes everyone else believe that we're snake oil, and that, neuroscience in marketing cannot be applicable. And that we claim to force the user to do anything they want, and that we can have people click on something even if it's not relevant, and that's not true. So I would warn against that. Like, if you want to get education on neuroscience, specifically in marketing, I run workshops, but also UCL ran workshops, and I did one just last week actually. So you can see all of the ways that you can have actually academic grade studies applied to marketing. And a claim that needs to be that I need to make is that even if we're looking at data that's below the surface, because we're not looking at something, when we're looking at electrodermal activity, or we're looking at EEG data, all of that sort of stuff, we're not looking at something that's on the surface. It's beyond traditional data and beyond traditional marketing. But that doesn't mean that whatever we observe in a certain situation applies to everything else. And whoever's claiming to do so, then they're probably not legit. So yeah, I feel like, to summarize, if you want to get educated in the space, just look for papers online, look for peer-reviewed papers, look for publications that come from reputable sources. I'm not particularly I don't post too much about that, and I feel like I should. But yeah, if you want somebody that posts a lot about neuroscience and marketing, just look for Joe Devlin on LinkedIn, professor of cognitive neuroscience at UCL. That's a great start.
Awesome. Yeah, and obviously we'll add all links in the description, obviously your links as well, so people can follow you. And just to finish off, last point, and I guess, you know, this is something you've discussed recently. How important is testing in SEO? Probably more than ever now. And do you have any practical tips and recent case studies of successful tests?
Yeah, so testing is super important. I think a lot of, I don't know about other teams. I feel like the teams that I've had, that I've worked with are quite wary of testing because they're like, oh, that's wasting time. And that's not. Like, even when we're following best practices, or when we think we're following best practices, it can actually be, you know, a tool for risk mitigation. And that's especially when you're working with other teams. So yeah, I tend to use testing a lot for risk mitigation, proving a point, and putting things up at scale. So I think right now I don't do much A/B testing, which is something that if you're in SEO, you can definitely do to see what resonates best with your audience, because whatever your competitor is doing or whatever the best practices might be, they might not resonate with your audience necessarily. So it's always good, especially coming from, you know, if you're observing something that comes from the behavioral data, then you can always apply to SEO. So we talked about maybe changing the messaging on one page. How does that affect rankings? How does that affect click-through rates? And that's always good to have a look at, because I think it provides even more of an understanding of how the entire journey now affects the way that search results are displayed. Now the tests I do are more to, again, like risk mitigation and to check impact. There was one of the better ones that we run was to, for example, check the click-through rates after we applied the return schema, which was something we got a lot of, you know, pushback, because it's such a tiny thing to do. But for some reason, it never, because we couldn't prove the impact from the get-go. You know, it's not something that's necessarily perceived as a game changer from some teams, so they tend to not put it in the backlog, or to put it very low on the backlog. But once we were able to prioritize that, it actually showed a significant increase in CTRs, showing that even if you have it in Emergence Center, you should apply it to as a schema markup for organic. And then, yeah, the other point that I was making for risk mitigation, I think testing, you know, sometimes when you work in bigger teams, it's sort of a play where the project that has the most the most like validation gets picked, and sometimes that happens to be from the teams that are more closely related to the transaction stage, or you know, just like that bring more money in. I think because SEO is still perceived sometimes to be quite related to upper funnel metrics and doesn't necessarily get much of the attribution for checkout rates, then it tends to get like discarded, or the projects tend to get like to get less important than other teams. But by collaborating with your product teams or your UX team, we can actually show what the impact would be if you were to apply that that change at scale. And we were able to prove it for the navigation, for example. The links that were chosen for a client of mine weren't really like following best practices for SEO. But they were the ones that another team really wanted to push because they were the best sellers. But from an SEO perspective, it did not make any sense, and we were able to prove that with essentially an A/B test. So yeah, I think in general, practical tips to start testing as well is gather an hypothesis first. I do have a number of like resources on that as well for testing, because I had to learn to do it on my own. There's amazing tools that are available that you can use if you have the budget to do so. But if you just need to make a point or like to prove something before you invest in a tool, just try to gather some hypotheses that you want to test, and then start looking into how to select test and control groups. I've run a few workshops on that as well. Again, something that now AI can help you do that and randomize things more evenly. And try to get the buy-in with the results, because if the test is, when you analyze, when you communicate results, then you might get some of the winner tests that you can implement at scale. And it's at that point you need to communicate the results to get the buy-in from your executive teams. But if something is a loser, then it kind of allows you to laser focus your strategy a bit better once you have more and more insights about what works and what doesn't work with your audience via your tests. Then you can start making changes that are actually meaningful, because whatever works for another industry, another audience, might not work for yours. And here we are talking about personalization and about reaching the user at a deeper level. So testing is a great opportunity to do so.
Yeah, awesome. I can't add too much to that. Obviously, why I would do testing is, like you say, you can read all the case studies in the world, but every website, every page has their own kind of behaviors, so depending on different factors. So that's why testing is important. And also, as you say, down the line as SEOs, we're probably going to get asked, yeah, but why would we do this? So if you have some ammo in your locker around that, then obviously it's going to help. And like you say, there are free ways to do it. Obviously there's tools like SEOtesting.com, which is a really great tool for that kind of thing. So yeah, fantastic. And I guess we'll wrap up, but yeah, amazing chat. I mean, I could talk to you about this for hours, but I didn't want to go into the subject too much down the rabbit holes, but hopefully one day we can do that. But yeah, thank you so much for being on. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.